Joining me now, Kelly Geraldine Malone, Washington correspondent with the Canadian Press. That is an independent news agency. Kelly, welcome. I'm curious what you're hearing about that meeting and the reason for Ford's apparent shift in tone. Are Canadian officials, are they holding their breath for April 2nd to see which tariffs Trump ultimately settles on?
Obviously, Ford came out of that meeting quite positive in how he was talking, bringing up a lot of the talking points of, families argue. But it was really clear that the meeting wasn't going to bring any change to Trump's plan to slap Canada with different levels of tariffs. What Canadian officials later said was they really sat down and went through Donald Trump's trade agenda that he signed January 20th, which is all these reports that are going to come out April 2nd about how to deal with trade around the world with these reciprocal tariffs. And it kind of took them through each part of that and how it would impact Canada. And so Canadian officials say, it's pretty clear that he remains committed to this tariff agenda. And there's obviously different levels of ones that are targeting Canada because you have the fentanyl related ones. And then the reciprocal tariff ones that are April 2nd, and then the ones that are currently on Canada, which is steel and aluminum. So I think Canadians are just looking for answers. That's kind of what officials in that meeting told me. And how they're walking out a bit more positive is at least now, after they were able to sit down with Jameson Greer, the new USTR, they're able to see a bit of the strategy while it felt like before they were just flailing.
I'm curious if Canadians, did they expect this tit for tat earlier this week? When Ford announced that 25% surcharge on electricity exports, Trump clapped back with the 50% tariffs, the ones you mentioned there on Canadian steel and aluminum, and declared a national electricity emergency. I mean, were they worried it would spiral out of control?
I think there was concern from different levels. There's been different kinds of responses. So we have a federal government response. Those are retaliatory tariffs that came into place after Trump first hit Canada with tariffs. And those are targeted to specific industries. So, Kentucky bourbon, things like that are trying to get a message across to specific states. Those were partially walked back. And then obviously the steel and aluminum were coming, and Ford said he was going to go ahead with this electricity surcharge to 3 American states. And they're, behind closed doors in different provinces, because he's a provincial leader, so he can make his own kind of choice about how a province will respond. I heard from other provincial leaders who were saying, this could escalate things, which is why maybe they aren't seeing the same thing across the country. I don't think anyone was surprised that it escalated things. And the question is whether Ford did that to get Trump's attention so he could get this meeting. That's some things that people are questioning in Canada.
And look, NBC reports that Trump's quest to conquer Canada, that's confusing everyone. Here's Trump this week in a response from Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. Take a listen.
To be honest with you, Canada only works as a state. It doesn't. We don't need anything they have. As a state, it would be one of the great states anyway. This would be the most incredible country visually.
It's crazy. His point is crazy. That's it. We will never, ever, in any way, shape, or form, be part of the United States.
Give me a sense of just the big picture, how Canadians feel about Trump's 51st state rhetoric. I mean, are they clear why Trump keeps pushing this and what specific Trump demand is Canada still not meeting?
I don't know if Americans fully understand how angry Canadians are right now from coast to coast. Like, it is a sense of betrayal. There's confusion. The U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement was signed in 2018, negotiated by Donald Trump, declared by President Trump the best trade deal ever. They recognize that fentanyl is an issue in Canada. Fentanyl is an issue, but generally it is a domestic supply causing the problem, and less than 1% of fentanyl seized going across the border comes from Canada. I've reached out to the DEA asking for any evidence, being that their latest risk assessment report didn't even mention Canada in it, and they pointed me to the White House. I reached out to the RCMP, the National Police Force in Canada, being like, where's the evidence of any of this? And they said, fentanyl's a problem, we want to deal with it, but we have no evidence to show large-scale movement of fentanyl from Canada to the U.S. In fact, there's more drugs moving from the U.S. into Canada. So there's a general sense of confusion among Canadians about, with everything going on in the globe, why the United States has decided to really target Canada. And I will say that federal officials in Canada are telling Canadians that Trump's team is telling them that his goal is to economically crush Canada in order to annex it. So that is the rhetoric that's going across Canada, is that they are taking these threats seriously and they don't find this funny. They don't see it as a joke.
Yeah. So Premier Doug Ford engages in a level of theatrical flair in his pushback against Trump, appearing on Fox and clearing U.S. liquors off Canadian store shelves, as you mentioned, the whiskey in particular. His campaign manager once said he speaks the language of Trump voters. How is he different from Carney, of course, Canada's new prime minister? And who would you say is better suited to negotiate with the Trump administration?
I won't weigh in on who's better suited, but I will say that they are fundamentally different politicians in almost every way possible. Whether or not it's their political history or how they speak or, how they address things. So Ford is a pretty legendary Ontario politician. He had a radio show where he'd go on and take questions. He hands everybody his cell phone number and it's like...
No Virginian, when I was on the campaign trail last November, was talking to me about Greenland or the Panama Canal or wanting to make Canada the 51st state. They were talking about bringing inflation down, and that's what Donald Trump said he would do. The tariffs hit Virginia very, very hard in the first Trump term, especially the ag and forestry sector. And they are already hitting us. Even while some of them are delayed, Canadians are pulling American products off shelves in protest, and these European reciprocal tariffs against American products are hurting us. I did a farmers roundtable in northwestern Virginia a couple weeks back, and I was hearing this over and over and over again. We can't bear the tariffs. One that was funny, there's a little bakery, Mom's Apple Pie is the name of this. That sounds like too good to be true for a political story, but they have 3 little bake shops, and the owner, April, said, listen, these tariffs are going to kill me. And I said, April, now come on. Your little bakery, tariffs? She goes, where do you think pie tins come from? They all come from Canada. They're aluminum, and nobody has to buy apple pie. And so it's an item that you buy when you want to celebrate, but you push the price of it up because pie tins increase by 25%. Then people buy a lot less. This hits everybody. It's bad for folks in terms of building supplies, groceries. It's bad for our farmers that want to export to other nations that now find reciprocal trade wars standing in their way. That's why I filed 3 days ago with 6 senators a challenge to President Trump's fake Canadian emergency that underlay a lot of the tariffs that he's imposing. We will have a vote in the Senate on that on the 26th or 7th of March. And I think a lot of Republicans at town hall meetings are getting an earful about how bad these tariffs are, and I'm expecting that some of them are going to be under some significant motive to vote for me on this bill.
This is not surprising. I mean, when you see the risk of prices going up because tariffs are being imposed, when you see layoffs that are going, across the entire federal workforce that may at some juncture total a couple 100,000, which would have an enormous impact and fallout and spread out through the economy, people are generally nervous. And they're nervous about a lot of other things as well. We're seeing consumer spending slow down because of this. We're seeing some prices continue to rise. We're seeing countries retaliate, whether it's the European Union, whether it's China, whether it's Canada and Mexico. We're seeing all these uncertainties pile one upon the other. And so not only is consumer sentiment down, but inflation expectations are up. We'll call that pre-stagflation right now, where you get weaker growth and higher prices. It's not something we've seen for quite a number of decades. And it is no wonder that, given the chaotic way in which these policies are being rolled out, that people are concerned.
Eddie, the economy or business was kind of Donald Trump's in his back pocket the whole time. Because for wealthy people, even though it was all about draining the swamp, they knew he was going to hook them up all along. And for his original working class base, it was like, I'm going to fight for you. And then he won on culture war issues. But if you look at how he targeted universities, and he's targeting them now, pulling the money because of DEI, sure, pull it over a culture issue. But it's going to have a devastating economic impact at these universities. In many states, they're the largest employers in the whole state. Is that going to be the thing that could potentially roast this guy when we end up not just with massive layoffs in the federal government, But what it does to all these colleges, all these hospitals.
Oh, absolutely. Downstream. Think about what happened to Johns Hopkins. Over 2,000 people laid off. Think about what that means for a city like Baltimore.
It's already a struggling city.
That's already struggling. Think about what's happening with the DOE and how that's going to impact local public school districts, how states are going to have to make decisions around hiring teachers and the like, and the like. This is going to have an impact downstream, right? So I think we need to be clear. The fact that, he's going to hook up his bros, right? That didn't even sound right coming out of my mouth. The fact that he's going to hook up his people, right? Doesn't mean that people thought he was a good businessman. How many times the dude went bankrupt?
Yeah, but they still saw him as that's business guy Donald Trump on the cover of magazines. Listen,
that's a marketing ploy.
Yes, I'm not saying he was a big business guy, but Donald Trump, being the guy on The Apprentice, told the American people, I'm your business guy.
So I am in the weird emotional position of being nostalgic.
Tell us.
Being nostalgic for Jared Kushner.
I've been talking about them for 2 days.
Oh, good God.
For 2 days.
No, and again, it's a strange emotional position.
I've been saying this for 2 days. Matt Iglesias posted it last night. I'm like, God, don't you kind of miss Jared? Yes.
So my main theory of the case is that at some point, the people who rely on the stability of the U.S. economy to actually enrich themselves, don't they have to intervene at some point? Right now, it feels like we're in a car with a drunk driver. And as much as Jared Kushner and Steve Mnuchin were people who were objectionable in all sorts of ways, Ron, the idea was they were some sort of ballast.
You've walked right into the soundbite that I have for you.
So Trump is realizing that he's losing to Canada. Because, again, Canada is united. Look, the pain is happening on both sides of the border. We're not going to deny it. Trump's dumb moves have caused pain in Canada. But they've also caused pain in the United States, increasing prices there. The thing, though, is Canadians realize why this is happening to us, and we're being resilient. So Canadians are going to see, in some cases, higher prices because of Trump's buffoonery, but we're placing most of the blame on Trump. Yeah, some of it's going to be corporations trying to take advantage of it. We're going to call them out. But we know that Trump's the main cause of this particular issue. In the States, though, as you saw at the end there, consumer confidence is falling. American consumers, because of what Trump is doing, have less confidence now than they've had in a while, right? Normally with a new president, that consumer confidence is on the rise because they're excited about the new president. Not this time, though, because what they're seeing is, one, Trump is insane. All of his moves are insane. Two, his moves seem to be focused on annexing friendly countries rather than fixing the issues at home. He's going on about these fantasies rather than the nuts and bolts day-to-day work of making the life of the average citizen better. But even though that part two makes it so much worse, because all of this really serves a purpose to increase prices. It's the exact opposite of what he promised. So while Canadians are being galvanized together by the buffoonery of Trump, Americans are being torn apart by it. So all Donald has done is divided his own country and united another against him.